Greetings. I'm David Cohen, president of the Common Bond Alliance. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to have an excellent discussion, United Against Extremism. We have a great panel from some of the many communities under attack by the same jihadist ideology. They're going to compare notes, and we're going to discuss how we can work together. The Common Bond Alliance was formed last year to unite the victims of jihadism around the world. Joining us in sponsoring today's event are the Jerusalem Interfaith Center and the American Muslim Multifaith Women's Empowerment Council, AMWEC. The Jerusalem Interfaith Center advances interfaith diplomacy by building relationships among religious leaders to promote peace. AMWEC, led by Anila Ali and a great team, empowers Muslim women to confront hate, strengthen religious freedom, and build bridges across America's diverse faith communities. Let me introduce our panel. Sunanda Vashisht is an author, human rights advocate, and member of the board of directors of the Common Bond Alliance. She's become a leading international voice for the rights of Kashmiri Hindus and other communities persecuted by Islamist extremism. Amir is an Iranian-born writer and member also of the board of directors of the Common Bond Alliance. His family fled Iran when he was a child, eventually receiving asylum in Sweden. He authors the Substack newsletter, Amir's Musings, offering analysis and commentary on geopolitics, religious extremism, popular culture, and current events. Diliman Abdulkader is the founder of American Friends of Kurdistan, an organization dedicated to strengthening U.S.-Kurdish relations through advocacy, education, and public policy. A foreign policy and national security expert, Diliman works closely with U.S. policymakers to advance the interests of the Kurdish people and other American allies. Wajid Ali Syed is a multimedia journalist, documentary producer, and founder of Abraham Publishing and Research Center. He was U.S. correspondent for GOTV and frequently publishes on South Asian politics and U.S. policy towards the Middle East. Yeshaya Rosenman is an Israeli journalist and expert on South Asian politics and a member of the board of advisors of the Common Bond Alliance. He is reported for The Hindu and Republic TV and writes about the Indian subcontinent, political religion, diplomacy, and international relations for publications in Israel and India. And to the audience, welcome. If you have any questions or comments at any point, please drop them in the Q&A. And if we have time, we will get to them. So with that, I'd like to talk to Sunanda first. Sunanda, you're from a well-known Hindu community in Kashmir, a region in northern India. Do you know how far back your family's history goes in Kashmir?
Yes, Kashmiri Hindus or Kashmiri Pandits, as they are commonly known, and both terms are interchangeable. We trace our history to about 2,000 years. And the reason I say this, and it's not just rhetoric, the Kashmiri Pandit community had been keeping an almanac or a calendar that we still use. And that calendar now, it's called Saptarishi calendar. It's one of the oldest lunar calendars still used in India in our day-to-day lives. And as you know, there are 3 lunar calendars used in India. But Saptarishi calendar, which is the calendar that Kashmiri Pandits use amongst themselves, and a copy of that calendar you'll find in every Kashmiri Pandit home to this day, that has been continuously been publishing for last 2 in one way or the other through 7 waves of exoduses through this continual genocide, the almanac has been publishing for last 2,000 years. So that's how we trace our lineage to this land where we are, of which we are indigenous people for last 2,000 years. And it's interesting that through everything that we have gone through, my community hasn't forgotten to keep track of time and calendar, because that's exactly what almanac is. So we keep track of time and dates through this.
Well, okay. I think in ancient times, you're talking about the calendar going back at least 2,000 years. Kashmir was overwhelmingly Hindu, correct?
Kashmir was only Hindu. It was about 2,000 years ago. It was only Hindu, and it continued to be Hindu for a very long time. It had Hindu kings were ruling, and we have traces going to Mahabharata, the time of Mahabharata, one of our epics that we read, that in the war of Mahabharata, the kings, when they were fighting, on those who know the epic, so as in every epic, there is fight versus good versus evil. So for the kings of both sides were sending out emissaries to kingdoms, and they were asking for help so that they could join either side. And we have traces of, and we do read stories of, deputies being asked or alliances being sought with Hindu kingdom in Kashmir. So it's really that old, and it has been predominantly Hindu kings till about 1336, which is medieval times, which is when Kashmir was conquered, but it was not conquered by force. It was not conquered via war, like other things. It was not conquered. It's a very interesting history of how Kashmir was conquered. And from 100% Hindu population, it became about 5% Hindu population in 1990, which is when I, along with my family, left. And that was the seventh exodus, which is part of the continual genocide that started in 1336. And from there on, now I believe the Hindu community is just about 1%, if that, in Kashmir Valley.
Well, Sunanda, you mentioned the period of time around 1990.
Yes.
One of the later exoduses of Hindus from Kashmir, and of course, you were there at the time, right?
Yes.
You were.
I'm an eyewitness. I'm an eyewitness.
You're an eyewitness. So tell us what happened to that period of time, and how did your family come to leave Kashmir?
Yeah. It's a long story, and the paucity of time, I won't be able to tell you there is a larger story and there is a personal story. So I'll quickly try to tell you, intersperse both. We just have to understand that Kashmiri Hindu struggle is the only continual genocide and not simply a genocide. The reason I call it a continual genocide is because this genocide hasn't ended. And unless a genocide is ended properly, and I'm a genocide scholar myself, so unless we physically force an end to genocide, and there are ways to end a genocide, it continues. And this genocide has shown itself in multiple exoduses. So I'll give you a statistic, which when I always, in my speaking assignments, when I talk about it, and when I give this statistic, that's when it really hits home. We've had 7 exoduses in last 700 years. That means every 100 years we've had one exodus. That means every third generation has seen an exodus from the land. And that's how this 100% community has become 1% today. So,
if your own family's history, though,
yeah,
I
my
know
own
it's a compelling
family's
story.
history.
So this
Yes,
is around the 1990 exodus.
in 1990. I was a young girl in 1990, barely a teenager. And that's when I call it a period of simmering dissent, We knew that something was wrong, but we were not clear what was going on. Hindus were under a permanent siege even when we were living there. So even when you were living there, because you were a micro minority, you were living under a permanent siege. And that's when the guns came into Kashmir for the first time. In 1989, 1990, guns came into Kashmir the first time and targeted killing started. In September of 1989, the most prominent leaders of Kashmiri Pandit was shot dead outside his home. And it was clearly the responsibility was taken by the jihadist organizations, and they clearly said why they wanted. It was not just what is communicated in Western press, that it was for self-determination. I don't understand, if the war is for self-determination, why does the micro minority have to be killed? But it was clearly not a self-determination war. It was a war for establishing what is known as Nizam-e-Mustafa, or the Sharia land. And that is why this minority had to be thrown out. So through targeted killings, we were terrified, and we were and then the slogans came out, and the slogans that I have heard with my own ears, where we were told that we need Kashmir. One of the nastiest and genocidal slogan was that we need to make Kashmir into Pakistan, or the land of pure, or a jihadist state, with Hindu women and without their men.
Wow.
When such slogans were raised from the mosques, and there is this one particular night of January 1990, which no Kashmiri Pandit will ever forget. That's when all mosques came together, and we were given ultimatum that if we don't leave, this is what will happen. Our men will be killed, and women will be forced into, I believe, sexual slavery or something like that, which had happened in the past. That is when
Can you give us around that time, I think there was a slogan, or actually an ultimatum, delivered to the Kashmiri Pandits. Can you say it in the original language and then
Yes.
translate it for us, please?
Reliv, Saliv, Galiv, which means either you become part of us, or you run away, or you die. We were given three choices. Reliv, Saliv, Galiv, which means either you join us, which is convert, flee, or die. Those were the three choices we had. And all throughout history, those are the three choices that my community has always had. And I am a witness to this. And I remember that night of 19th January 1990, I always say my childhood died that night, because we were in my grandfather's house, and my grandfather, an old feeble man, who had never even picked up a kitchen knife, who did not even know how to kill a mosquito. That old man stood up, and he rounded the women in the family, which is my grandmother, my mother, and I. And he shut the door. He knew that there is nothing that could be done, because that night we felt we were going to be attacked. And that's when the slogans from mosques were blaring. And we were told, and he rounded us up, and with the old axe, which he got from attic, and he said, when they come in, I will kill you first. He was saying this to his daughter, to his wife, to his daughter, and to his granddaughter. As a child, I just could not understand how my grandfather could say this. But he, in his wisdom, felt that killing us would be a far more glorious end to our lives than pushing us into sexual slavery or jihadist slavery, or whatever would become of us if we were attacked. So that is the magnitude of what we have seen. This is the world before the world knew ISIS. This is before the world knew the rise of Islamic State. But we've seen it there. I have seen it with my own eyes. And of course, next day, on that January 1990, I think about 90% of Hindu population left that day. from Kashmir. My family still stayed. My mother and I, we did not have any source of income outside Kashmir. My mother was a teacher and she did not have a source of income outside Kashmir. We didn't know where to go. So we continued staying there. We continued till August. We tried. We tried. We continued till August, till it became completely untenable. The neighbors turned against us. Neighbors were informing people about Kashmiri Pandit homes, and they would come and attack. And there was something called hit lists that were generated. The hit list meant that if your name was put on that hit list, one of my uncles was on that hit list, that he would be, you would be the next to die. We had several losses in the family. One of my uncles was shot dead on March 1st, 1990. He was shot dead by his own driver outside his house. And we witnessed other friends and families being murdered, shot dead. And then there came a fatwa from the school, which was the final nail in the coffin, so to speak. A fatwa came from school. Our uniform, I was a young girl, our uniform used to be a blouse and a skirt and a tie, like regular public school uniform. But a fatwa came that all girls should have their hair covered and they should wear conservative dresses. There was a dress code that we were told, and that proved to be the last nail in the coffin. My mother couldn't see. I remember going to school for a few days with my head covered, and my mother could not take it anymore. And that's when we said, whatever happens, we just will have to leave. And that's when we left with barely a shirt on our backs. We left for Delhi, and we've been there ever since. My mother hasn't gone back. None of my family has ever gone back. Our homes are there. Our lives are there. We lost everything. I don't have any, it seems like a trivial thing to say, but when my kids ask me for my baby pictures or albums, or they want to know what I looked like when I was young, I don't have any. I don't have any memories. All memories were left behind in the house. But that is a small price to be paid. What we paid, what the bigger price was, what my community paid, we lost our way of life. We lost who we were. We lost our identity, as much as they tried to do, but we managed. But once geography is very important, David, to maintain history. I always say that, and this is why I always support the Jewish idea of homeland. It is so precious to me, and it means so much to me, because you cannot maintain your history without geography. Geography is important. We belong to that place. And if you are moved away from that place, yes, we maintain our identity, but without our geography, there is so little. It's already diluted so much. So it's genocide in multiple forms. It's not just a physical genocide where people are killed. Genocide is also cultural genocide, where our culture is being eroded. So my community is still going through multiple forms of genocide.
Briefly, Sunanda, because I'm going to move on to our other panelists, but I've heard you testify. I heard you testify before the Tom Lantos Commission on Capitol Hill and otherwise. And our time is a little short, but there were a couple of stories from Kashmir around that time that I found so shocking. And if you could just briefly tell me about Girijatiku and BK Ganju. Those are two that I
I
remember.
mentioned in my testimony,
Yeah.
and and they were. I just picked them randomly out of so many that I could have picked up, but those were the most gruesome to me. Girijatiku was a young lab technician who had just gone to collect her wages, her salary, and she was abducted by people she knew, and she was raped, gang raped, and then and that was not the end of her ordeal. She was cut on a saw, a manual saw. She was cut into two pieces. At that day on Lanto's community, I said, I speak for her today because her family has never been able to speak. I met her family later after the deposition in the US Congress, but they have not been able to speak. But she was cut into two halves.
And
BK
I think you
Ganju,
said in the testimony that this is while she was still alive.
this is while she was still alive, gang raped and then cut into two halves while she was still alive.
That was.
And then BK Ganju was a young engineer, a 30-year-old engineer with two young daughters. And he was put on that infamous hit list that I told you because he used to work for Government of India. Anybody, the easiest way to target anybody was to call them mukbirs or informers or people who are working for the Government of India. None of them were working. They were just employees. So he was an employee of Government of India in the Department of Telecommunications. So the jihadists came for him, and his wife hid him in a rice drum in the attic. And I get goosebumps when I talk about it. So she hid him in the rice drum, and when the jihadists came for him, she said, "No, he's not here. I don't know where he is. He's left." So the jihadists left. As they were leaving, a neighbor had seen BK Ganju hiding himself in a drum. He pointed to the jihadists that he is in the attic. They came back. They shot him in the drum and made his wife eat the blood-soaked rice. The
Wow.
same blood-soaked rice.
Wow.
There
Well,
are hundreds of stories like this that I can tell you. But for paucity of time, I cannot go into all of them. There was a young man who was killed, and then dogs were left on him to lick his blood because he could not, they didn't give him water. One of my uncles, he was shot dead, and announcement was made from the mosque that anybody from the neighborhood who comes to help the family will be shot dead exactly the way he was shot dead.
wow. Well, there's so many stories that
there are stories that are gut-wrenching, and it seems, David, it's unbelievable that in modern times we would see this. This is not medieval era. This is 1990. This is not medieval era. This is not 1620. This is 1990.
This is
modern time. This is when we are an enlightened human race. And this is what we are seeing in 1990.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Sunanda, for sharing your personal story and some of the stories of your community. Yeshaya, I want to go to you next, if I could. We were talking about Kashmir, and I know you're aware that in Kashmir last year, there was a terrorist attack in Pahalgam. 24 Hindus were murdered. A Christian was murdered, and a heroic Muslim worker there at the resort was killed trying to stop the attacks. So I know you're well familiar with it, and you probably also know that a lot of apologists for the terrorists used the attack as an opportunity not to vilify the terrorists, but to vilify the government of India. So I'm just going to read you some quotes that came from Al Jazeera reporters and others that we got on social media, and just get your reaction. Former Al Jazeera journalist Sana Syed characterized Kashmir, this was right after Pahalgam, she characterized Kashmir as, quote, occupied territory where India was, quote, brutally repressing its Muslim population. Others accused India of committing, quote, genocide in Kashmir and engaging in, quote, apartheid and, quote, settler colonialism. Kashmir was characterized as a, quote, open-air prison where Hindus were committing, quote, land theft giving Muslims, quote, the right to resist. Does anything strike you about the language used to criticize India?
Yeah.
Yes, first of all,
Oh,
yes,
sorry. Go ahead.
yes, yes. So first of all, yes, of course, it is Orwellian in nature. When you speak about what was it, colonialism? I mean, one does not have to be a great historian to understand that Hindus are indigenous, were the indigenous religion of Kashmir. Islam simply came later, regardless of, the details, the exact details of how it spread, and all the details that Sunanda went into. But how can you be colonialist if you are the original? You're the original indigenous people. The Muslims, most of the Kashmiri Muslims themselves were originally Hindu families. The names, families like Bhat, these are Hindu names. So again, apartheid. These are all basically most of this rhetoric is copy pasted from the war against Zionism, against Israel. Many of these forces in America, many of the radical academics in the Middle Eastern Studies departments and the South Asian Studies departments are basically fighters for the same cause. They rally to the same Palestinian slogans in Colombia and the same Kashmiri radical slogans alongside them. So the rhetoric is it rings a bell, deja vu. And also, I'll say that when they talk about resistance, again, this is all deeply sinister rhetoric. If these journalists can't sympathize with people being gunned down in a park, it's just it really speaks to their moral depravity more than anything else.
Sure. And of course, a lot of people in Israel and Jews around the world, felt there were similarities, of course, between the Pahalgam attack and attacks that have been waged against Jews. You live in Israel. You were in Israel on October 7th, 2023, and you
Mhm.
told me that the very next day you went down to Sderot, uh, one of the cities in the south that had been attacked. You went there as a journalist.
Yes.
Uh, can you tell us some of the things you found there?
Even before that, I'll mention that I have four brothers in the army. So one of them was doing peripheral security on the 7th of October in the battles in Kfar Aza, a village near Gaza.
Sure.
And he said it was like a zombie apocalypse. Like when he came there, he wasn't actually fighting, he was securing the perimeter, but he said there were just bodies and munitions in every shape and form, just all over the place. It was like a zombie apocalypse. He had never seen anything like it. And he subsequently fought hundreds of days in the war. Was almost killed once in Gaza itself. But when I came to Sderot, so Sderot, at the western edge of Sderot, it's a kilometer from Gaza, from the village of what used to be Beit Hanun. Um, so when I came to Sderot, I took the train from Jerusalem, and along the way, the train stopped 3 hours. It was basically a train that the final stop in Sderot. Uh, it was not going to reach the final stop. It was going to stop one stop before because the battles were still going on in the south, and Sderot was still dangerous. So it was supposed to reach Ashkelon, but it stopped at Ashdod 2 stops before because there were gun battles going on along the train route between Ashdod and Ashkelon. So I waited 3 hours in the train. Then when I finally reached Ashkelon, I took a taxi to Sderot. I came around. So this is if the war broke out 6:29 a.m. Saturday morning. That was the last day of the Jewish holiday season. So I came there Sunday around, was it 2 p.m.? This is, a day and a half later, and they had finally, declared, coast clear in Sderot. They had, searched out the last terrorists in the police station, the big battle that was there. So I came there. It's a town of around 30,000. It was largely deserted. People had been evacuated. The only people you saw on the streets were military, police, military, and a few, aid workers, medics, different, humanitarian efforts. There was no, so I stayed in an empty religious dormitory of a religious seminary of a yeshiva there. There was no electric. The electric was still down. It had been hit by the attack in Gaza from Gaza had been accompanied by thousands of Qassam rockets. So the electricity had been taken down. by these rockets. It took till the following day till the electric company could get the electric back. It was a deserted town of 30,000 people. The few people, so I was reporting for the Hindu and for Republic TV, two Indian
These are
publications.
Indian, for everyone's
Yes,
benefit, these are
one
Indian
left-wing paper and
outlets.
one a left-wing paper and a right-wing news channel. I don't take sides on these issues. I was just doing reporting. So I was trying to meet the few people who were there who were able to tell the story. So naturally, the people who were there were the people who simply couldn't leave. So I found a woman who, in the article, I wrote her up as 75. She was clearly older than that. She was in her 80s, and an old elderly woman born in Morocco. She was there with her blind son, so she couldn't leave. And she was telling me the story of how the previous night, as you know, the terrorists were rampaging through the streets, uh, um, searching for houses to break into, shooting in the streets, and searching for houses to break into. So she barricaded her door with a table and was just hiding there with her blind son. It's like an 80-year-old woman. Then I met other people who didn't really want to talk for obvious reasons. They had just missed being massacred as the white Toyotas with machine guns came into town. They had gone to morning prayers a bit late, like a minute late or something like that. These like basically the attack was at sunrise. So they were going to, you know, early morning prayers, and they were a bit late, so they missed it by like a minute. They missed the Toyotas, and they were narrowly saved. Other people I spoke to, another woman told me the story of her son, who had not been in Sderot. He had been in a village, a kibbutz, a few miles away from Sderot, and he had hid in the closet in a locker when the terrorists came. And he could see out through the locker, and he saw his friends being beheaded by the terrorists.
Oh,
He
wow.
stayed in the closet all night until the IDF came in the morning. When they came, he just ran out, didn't say a word, and drove all the way up north and just stayed there time.
So
And
he saw the
yes,
beheading.
yes. Now,
It's reminiscent. I'm sorry, go ahead.
yes, no, please. What were we saying?
Well, Sunanda recounted some stories of like operatic sadism and cruelty, like sawing Girajatiku in
Yes,
half while she's still alive, and making the wife eat the husband's blood in the
yes.
rice.
It was.
It
This
seems
was.
like the sadism is part of the
Yes,
point. What do
yes.
you
So
remember about October 7th that is reminiscent of that theme?
yes. So I'll say two things about this. First of all, I stayed a week in Sderot, and then 2 more weeks I was reporting from Jerusalem. Immediately, within a day or two, the foreign reporters started coming. So I was a bit of a hub for foreign reporters, you know, connecting them to different people. Um, so there was one man there from an Indian reporter, Sumi Chaudhry. Sumi Chaudhry is a war reporter, and he had been to Iraq under ISIS and to Taliban's Afghanistan when they conquered Afghanistan. And as time went on, like a week or two later, since there were so many foreign reporters here, they did a segment on Channel 12, Israel's largest TV network. They wanted to bring on a foreign reporter to tell about his experience here in Israel. So I arranged for Sumit to go on Channel 12, and he came there and said that Sumit Chowdhury, I've seen ISIS, I've seen the Taliban, and this was worse. I've seen it, and this was worse. Now, I can say that in the first week after the war, I'm talking about like, let's say the war started on Saturday, so this was like Wednesday or Thursday, Wednesday maybe. They were offering foreign journalists a tour of the kibbutzim with the IDF spokesman, and they warned us that the bodies hadn't been buried yet, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, I didn't understand at first what was going on. In Judaism, we bury bodies immediately. I mean, the funeral we try to do as soon as possible
Right.
to give people the final resting. And I didn't understand. It's already a week. Why haven't they buried the bodies? And I decided not to go on this tour because I knew very well what I was going to see there. As I said, my nephew had fought in this war and seen what it looks like. And then as information was coming out, I understood why they hadn't buried the bodies. The bodies, beyond being mutilated and in horrific ways, they had been booby trapped. They had inserted grenades into people's, you know, pinless grenades into people's stomachs and genitalia and all sorts of disgusting things. So I was very happy. I saw no reason to go on this I relieved myself from going on this tour, but other people did, and it was a horrific, really horrific thing to see. And I can say that there were different units in the army that were collecting body parts for weeks after this, all over the Nova Festival and trying to, let alone the Shura camp in Ramle. The Shura camp is the camp was an ad hoc. It's a base of the Israeli military rabbinate, the people in charge of burials, among other religious services in the army, and they had set up an ad hoc, a huge camp, a huge ad hoc morgue. And my parents' neighbor worked there in reserve duty, simply taking care of the bodies. And he was tremendously traumatized just by looking at the bodies. We had our most veteran pathologists, Chen Kugel, the most famous pathologist in Israel, people who've seen car accidents and fires and you name it. And they were in tears. These are people who had seen everything and they were in tears. They had never seen bodies tortured in such terrible ways. And I can say one more, the second thing I wanted to say was that in that week, I had to report. I was going, constantly on Telegram and getting information and things like that. And there were some channels that I went on. There were back then many more Hamas channels, official Hamas channels, in which they were broadcasting this stuff. In other words, this massacre, many of the terrorists had GoPro cameras, and they were very proud of what they were doing. Very, very proud of what they were doing. They were broadcasting it. And I saw channels like Gaza Now. I don't know if the channel has been taken down or not, but back then Gaza Now was one of the big channels. And these posts on Telegram with, again, I tried to see very little of it, but really gruesome stuff was getting tens of thousands of, love icons and smile icons and happy. And they were very much proud of it. And in other words, and we saw things that are still available online of this man who killed 10 Jews and then took one of their phones and he calls his mother and he's ecstatic. He's saying, "Oh, Mom, I killed 10 Jews." And his mother says, "Oh, bless you. This is like the greatest day of their life." And again, it just speaks to the level of depravity that this town of sinners, this Sodom and Gomorrah of Gaza had reached, where these kind of things, if anyone would tell a psychiatrist that he was fantasizing about doing these kind of things, a psychiatrist would lock him up and say, "This man is dangerous, keep him out of human society, I have nothing I can do for him." And here they were, this is an entire society profoundly proud of what they were doing, completely beyond normative human psychology. So again, it just goes to show when these problems are allowed to fester and explained away and even justified by ideology, like on the campus ideology. This is the level of depravity that humans are capable of reaching.
Yeah, no, it's certainly the case. And thank you, Yeshaya, for sharing your experience with us. Amir, you were born in Iran, a place that has been going through some difficulties. Well, I guess for the past almost since 1979 at least. Certainly. I want to talk about what's going on there, but first, I want to ask you, what can you tell us about the belief system of Iran's current leadership? Are these people we can make deals with? What can you tell us?
Yeah, it's very hard to speak after Sunanda and Yeshaya's testimonies. It's really, I'm sorry. It's really hard to speak objectively after hearing what we've just heard, but I'll try. I'll give two anecdotes. Well, if you wish to call them anecdotes. Excuse me. One is one of my earliest memories from Iran. I may have been 6 or 7 years old watching TV with my family, and what we are seeing on the news is a sea of mothers in their hijabs celebrating close to dancing as far as dancing is permitted in Iran. Why were they dancing? Why were they celebrating and chanting ecstatically because their sons had been murdered. They were celebrating the deaths of their sons in the jihad against Saddam Hussein's regime. They were rejoicing. They were ecstatic the same way that I don't even want to call him an animal, because an animal is not as wicked as the man who called back to his mother on in the example that Yeshaya just used. They were just as ecstatic as that man. That's anecdote number one that I want to share with you. The second is more general. In the 1980s, the Iranian regime placed an order for 150,000 white plastic keys from Taiwan. Now, for the viewers here, you may not know why this order was placed by the Iranian regime, the Islamic regime, I should say. It was placed so that the children, some as young as 9, many as young as 9, were asked to be minesweepers for the Artesh, the army, during the Iran-Iraq war. So they would send these small children, 9 years old, 10 years old, and so forth, to become basically human minesweepers. And if they were to perish during their duties, as tens of thousands did, that white plastic key would give them entry to paradise. And I believe 120,000 children signed up for this. And when I say children, I mean under the age of 15.
Wow.
Now, you asked me, David, is there negotiation and what do they actually believe? Those are two very clear and easily answered questions. Unfortunately, we have this reluctancy to accept the answers. And by we mean the West. The answer is that we are talking about, first of all, a millenarian regime. That term cannot be overstated. This is a regime that wholeheartedly believes in the end times. And they believe that by wiping Israel off the map, by cleansing the world of Western decadence, the 13th Imam will appear from his hiding. And that is the end days of Shia eschatology. And they believe this as clearly as you and I believe in gravity. They believe this as wholeheartedly as we believe in freedom of speech. That is Islam in the Shia form, in its purest possible convictions. So, is negotiation with such an entity possible? Of course not, because a negotiation absolutely requires a level of compromise where one is willing to budge on a certain element of their of what they hold precious. At least that needs to be where you go into a negotiation. Now, the challenge for democracies in the West is that we work out of 4-year cycle in the US or 5-year cycles here in the UK. So we take into account our electorate. What are the polls saying? What is my likelihood of getting elected in the next election? Those are the thoughts that exist within democracies. Within the Islamic regime of Iran, those do not even appear on the radar, because the only thing that exists is this end times of bringing forth the Mahdi. So how can you negotiate with an entity like that? It's absurd to the level of caricature to imagine that such an entity can be negotiated and reasoned with? What reason can you offer to which they may budge? What argument can you place forward for them to think, maybe I'm willing to budge on my eschatological, theological aspiration? Of what earthly prizes are you willing to put on the table as a reward or as a remuneration for them to say, okay, do you know what? I'm willing to compromise with my eschatological, theological convictions. It takes those convictions, it takes those beliefs to be able to commit the acts that Sunanda and Yeshaya have shared with us today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. We're actually running behind schedule, and we have two more excellent panelists that I want to get in there. So we're going to be able to work every one back in. But I know you. I mean, you have a lot to say about what the Islamic regime is doing to your people right now, and yeah, hopefully they will be free. But it's quite a terrible situation. I want to move to Diliman now, and Diliman, of course, you work in Washington, D.C., and you're an advocate for the Kurdish community, focused primarily on the federal government and national security issues. When you're visiting a senator or a congressman who may not have much background on Kurdistan and the Kurdish people and their aspirations and what they've been through, how do you introduce the subject to them?
Well, thank you for having me, David. I appreciate you organizing this timely event as well. Look, the Kurds are deeply embedded in the Middle East. They're geographically located in the heart of the Middle East. They're surrounded by the conversation always tends to start with Turkey because Turkey is a NATO ally of the United States. And the largest population of Kurds are in Turkey, in Southeast Turkey, in what we call Southeast Turkey today. And that's 25 million alone in that part of the country. But the Kurds are, they were promised a state of their own, right, after World War I. To this day, they're suffering from those consequences, the borders that were drawn after World War I, where the Kurds weren't able to attain a state of their own, self-determination. And now, to this day, they're facing mass atrocities since that day. So you have the fall of the Ottomans, you have the rise of Ataturk. The Kurds were systematically being deprived of basic rights, identity rights. They weren't allowed to call themselves Kurds. The word Kurdistan was illegal. You would go to prison. You would lose your life. And that happened under Hafiz Assad's father. That happened under Bashar Assad in Syria. That happened under the Shah in Iran. That happened under the Islamic regime, and it still happens under the Islamic regime. That happened under Saddam Hussein in Iraq for decades. So this has been the story of the Kurds. It's the fight for their identity, the fight for saying, hey, we're not Arabs. We're not Iranians. We're not Turks. We're Kurds. We speak Kurdish. Our language is Kurdish. Our identity is a Kurd. This is what historically is Kurdistan. And I think the reason for the Kurds that, if you compare to other minorities, which is very important, is that the Kurds have survived over a century, largely because they do fight back. Largely because they don't bend the knee to radical Islamists. They don't bend the knee to Ba'athist dictators and Arab nationalists, Turkish nationalists, Iranian nationalists. And I think that's the uniqueness of the Kurds. With that comes consequences, right? That's the main issue. But the Kurds are strong fighters. They're strong American allies. They have a long history in aligning and being in Western, having alignment with Western values. They tend to be more secular than the rest of the region. Even though they're Muslim as well, they're Sunni Muslims, majority of the Kurds. But there are also Christian Kurds, there's Jewish Kurds, Zoroastrian Kurds. But that kind of tells you the history of the Kurds too, right? Of all these previous religions too, that the identity of the Kurds. But the unique thing about the Kurds is that they identify as Kurds first. And that's why they've created, there's so many enemies around them that cannot stand that notion that, hey, you're not identifying as an Arab, you're not identifying as a Turk or Islamist. Therefore, we have to target you.
Well, you mentioned because Kurds fight back, there have been consequences. And of course, there have been famous examples, Saddam Hussein using chemical weapons against the Kurds. What are some of other examples from recent history of ways that Kurds have really paid the price for opposing extremists of all types in their very rough neighborhood?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Saddam used chemical weapons in '88, and in years after that, the first Gulf War, where Saddam created a mass exodus of the Kurds in Iraq in the north. That was all part of them fighting back for years, and the goal was to basically ethnically cleanse and wipe the Kurds off their historical land. To this day, recent conflicts in the region, a majority of them involved the Kurds to fight against ISIS. The Kurds were the first on the battlefield. They were right there facing ISIS face to face. The Kurdish women were fighting against ISIS and are fighting against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. The Peshmerga, the SDF, under the previous Syrian Democratic Forces, the YPG, YPJ. So you have Kurds fighting directly against radical Islamic terrorists, against Al-Qaeda in Iraq and in Syria. The Peshmerga fought decades against Saddam, and when that toppled, they were aligned with the United States. So you have a laundry list, if you will, of Kurds taking on the enemies. The problem is the Kurds aren't rewarded for their sacrifice. In the fight against ISIS alone, the Kurds lost 15,000 plus men and women on the front lines. Right. And that's across Iran and Iraq and Syria. And unfortunately, the Kurds now have to face those consequences of what's happening in Syria, the recognition of literally an ISIS, Al-Qaeda, wanted terrorist previously by the United States with a $10 million bounty on his head, who's now president of Syria, Jolani. So these are the kind of the rewards that the Kurds end up receiving. The Kurds said, we did all this, now what? And then you have the war against Iran today. The Kurds are asked to fight again. Why? Because the Kurds are the most battle-hardened in the region. The Kurds are the most organized, armed group in the country, and they're asked. And they know the Islamic regime. They fight against the Islamic regime even long before this war. They've continued to fight against the mullahs. So I think the Kurds were asked again. Now, with the Kurds learned their lesson in Iraq, Kurds learned their lesson in Syria. They said, you want us to fight? We have a list of demands that you have to fulfill before we go in and sacrifice ourselves, because we just witnessed what happened against our brethren in Syria. You recognize an ISIS guy as president, and what did the Kurds get out of it? Nothing. Yeah. We did all that. If it wasn't for the Kurds, radical Islam and radical Islamists and Al-Qaeda and ISIS would be across Europe tenfold today. They were going through Turkey openly. Former U.S. officials have admitted that publicly. Turkish border was wide open. Erdogan himself threatened Europe and the European Union that he would flood the gates of Europe with radical Islamists and ISIS if he didn't get rewarded, if he didn't get funding from the EU with the refugees and whatnot. So you have a fellow so-called NATO ally that is blackmailing you into policies and trying to form your policies across Europe and even in the United States to a certain degree. But you're betraying a reliable ally on the ground that you know you will have to rely on them again. So I think the Kurds are learning their lesson of don't fight first, the political aspect of the battles. And I think we saw the consequences of that. You know, the war is still ongoing. I think the Kurds are still well into this, and they're prepared. The Kurds in Iran are prepared to, when it's time, when they feel like it's right, to protect their people and liberate their cities specifically. They're prepared to fight the Iranian regime.
Well, yeah, and we'll see what unfolds, and your points are well taken. In the interest of time, Wajid, I'm going to call an audible, and I'd like to visit with you. And Wajid, I'd like to start by acknowledging something I wanted to discuss with you in more detail, but let me just acknowledge it, that more Muslims are killed in, by jihadist violence than any other group. So, in the interest of time, maybe we'll just acknowledge that, but perhaps move on to more positive things, because, of course, part of our discussion, we wanted to talk about how different communities who have been impacted by jihadist violence can work together. And that is certainly an area where you have a lot of experience and are doing great work. And just a note to
I
our
do, but
audience.
I don't think I have anything positive to say here when it comes to jihadism and everything. But yes, there are people killed in Kashmir, in India, all over this Muslim Brotherhood ideology where they wage war against their own people just to one control the country and then wage global jihad. We're gonna ultimately take over the world and then rule how, for the lack of better words, the Ottomans did. So, but
Sure.
anyway,
Well, let me just and we'll have this conversation. Let me just announce to the audience. We're going to run over a little bit, maybe about 10 minutes, and we apologize for that and thank everyone for their patience. But the testimonies have been so compelling
yeah,
that we really needed to hear them, and we also really need to hear the good news about what people from different communities are doing to come together and stand up for one another against extremism. Uh, can you first tell me about O Jerusalem? Because I know that's your new project, and that struck me as something that was very much in the spirit of one community uh, honoring what other communities had
yeah.
been through. So what is that? How did it come about? And why is it important to you?
Yes, sir. So I'm going to take just 1 minute and talk about the background of this. The Global Terrorist Index, it's an annual index that comes out. It's a report that comes out every year. And this time, surprisingly, even to me, was that Pakistan ranked number one. Even though from 2003 onwards to 2023, and especially 2009, 10, 11, there were suicide bombs, there were attacks, there were terrorist attacks, and all sorts of mechanisms used to terrorize people. And each year there were over 100 and 140 attacks throughout the country. So that was back in 2009, 10, 11. I was surprised to read that 2025 it topped the index. Given that the Taliban had taken over in Afghanistan that the Iranian regime were killing its own people, thousands of them in just under a week. And then whatever was happening with the Uyghurs and everything, and Pakistan was in the middle of that. Um, and yet, the response that came from the Arab world was very interesting to me. They spent their petrodollars to fund this ideology called Muslim Brotherhood across South Asia, across the Arab world. And ironically, now the Arab states have banned all these organizations called ISIS, Al Qaeda, Daesh, Taliban,
Right.
XYZ. And now they do not send their own children to European universities or the UK
Yes.
because they could get radicalized.
Right.
So it's funny to me that you spent billions of dollars radicalizing these countries, and now you want to safeguard your own children, claiming that the Western countries are so radicalized that that their own kids would be affected by that. Okay, moving on. Since you asked about Oh Jerusalem, I'm going to show this book if you don't mind. It's
Please.
called Oh Jerusalem. It's the witness delegations, Truth, Faith, and October 7. This was AMWEC's, as you mentioned in your introduction, initiative to take Muslim leaders from North America to Israel to bear witness, basically. What happened? What were the atrocities committed by Hamas? Again, supported by some Muslim Brotherhood ideology. Um, and those Muslim leaders and influencers went there, saw with their own eyes what happened on October 7, and then came back, which came back with a changed perspective, not just hanging on to the mainstream media narrative, which is it's a Jewish state, so no Muslim lives here, apartheid, and they're committing genocide, which is, well, the Gazan population has risen
Wrong.
since then. So my partnership and my contribution, the Abraham PRC, was to publish these testimonies from Muslim leaders who went there, who saw for themselves what happened there. Like, give you a very simple example. They did not know that the Great Golden Dome is not Masjid Al-Aqsa.
Mhm.
They standing at Kotel and hearing Adhan was very surprising to them. So much so that the Israeli president just sworn in 7 Islamic judges. They had no idea about it. So them going there through AMWEC and the partner organizations, and Yeshaya knows about that. It's Sharaka and Combat Anti-Semitism, and one of your sponsors, which is the Jerusalem Interfaith Center, were the partner organizations over there. They took these leaders, they went there, and then when they came back, Abraham PRC put their testimonies together as a collection so that the other Muslims living here with this narrative that Israel is an evil state would know what that land is, what those people are, and interact with them on a human level. I tell you one thing, David. Across these testimonies, there are like 15 or something. There's one thing that stands out. It's one thing that stands out, which is we were lied to. And that's very thought provoking to me and would be to others as well. It's available on Amazon as well if people want to go and read it and order it. And it comes down to the Muslims who stand up for minorities, for the Christians in Pakistan, for the Kashmiris in India, for Jewish people anyway, who suffered after October 7. I know there have been little skirmishes here and there throughout before 2023. But when they go there, I mean, they see with their own eyes, their perspective absolutely changed, which was one, we were lied to, and second, we now are going to talk about Israel and the Jewish community in a sense where we take them as humans, where we take them as people who have been harmed by this Islamist Muslim Brotherhood jihadist ideology. Here's another thing, and you know that already, but for your audience, AMWEC's president, which is Anila Ali, you mentioned that in your introduction as well, lost relations. I did too, because we were standing against Hamas, the popular narrative, and then also got life threats. So if you stand against organizations like ISIS and Al Qaeda and Taliban, and even in the European and American or Western world, especially in America, I would talk about. In America, this organization called CARE, Council on American and Islamic Relations, if you call them out for their bigotry, you get life threats in America. One of our, and Yeshaya knows that, I'm calling him because we have known each other, and when we took the delegations there, we met every time we went to uh, holy places and across country. This friend of ours who went to Israel came back, Pakistani guy from Sindh, Imtiaz Mir, was shot dead by the Iranian regime in Pakistan, in Karachi. 5 bullets in his head throughout his chest, just because he was saying, I've seen the truth. I stand with the Jewish people. I know what Hamas did, and that was wrong, and and I resist that kind of Islamism, right?
Wow.
And he was killed. So one of our friends calls him martyr of the Abraham Accords,
Wow.
um, because when people call out that Islamism, they get attacked from within and without as well. So I'm gonna stop here because we're running out of time, I know.
Yeah, we are just about out of time, but I very much admire the courage of people who are willing to build bridges within the Muslim community, well, from the Muslim communities to other communities, and bridges that the jihadists don't want built.
Yeah.
And I know you can testify, as you have started to testify, the great personal cost that takes, and of course, it must dissuade people from wanting to embark on the path that you have taken.
Yeah.
And it really has to be commended because,
No, because they get blackballed by, even if they're not anti-Semitic, they get canceled out. You're not one of us now. The sort of hate from your friends that you get just for standing on the right side of the history is just astonishing. It's mind-boggling.
yeah. Well, we are running overtime. We wanted to talk more about how we can work together, and I guess we can do future webinars on that. But Wajid, you've given us an introduction into how we can work together because you've done it. Our sponsor, the Amwec, uh, does it every day, and folks on this panel, especially well, all of the folks on this panel are very much involved in building bridges across communities, so we can all stand up against extremism, and that's very much appreciated. So, unfortunately, we would have liked to have had time for more discussion, but the
David,
testimonies were so compelling. And
if
yeah,
I may, I think
sure.
we, in the separate regions, people are fighting their own fights, but I think we also need to come together to fight this menace, this Islamism, this jihadism within our own societies. Living in America, living in Europe, we have to face them right head on, to crush them rather than letting them, in the name of free speech, which is actually the hate speech, I believe, letting them get away with that. So I would really want to save this society that we have built here.
Yeah, and that's what that's what it's about. It's about saving all of our civilizations, and
Yeah.
it's the imperative, and that's why we formed the Common Bond Alliance, and that's why I know all the people on this panel are doing what they do. So, with that, I want to thank our panelists. I hope our audience found this webinar educational. Uh, if you're in the audience, we can't hear you, but I'd still like you to give a round of applause for our great panelists. And panelists, you can't hear them, but I'm sure you're getting a standing ovation right now. But thank you all for giving your time and also your personal stories, which are in many cases harrowing.
David,
Some,
I just want to say something for 5 seconds.
sure.
There is, you were asking, so do you have anything positive to say? And he said there isn't. And there is true, it is. There is so much doom and gloom everywhere. But when I see people like us coming together, I can assure everyone, including Amir and Yeshaya and Diliman and Wajid, if we all work together, we can, love will always, as cliched as it sounds, love will always prevail and goodness will always prevail. It takes time, but it will prevail. If good people come together like all of us did today, we will prevail.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end our webinar on. Thank you, Sunanda. Thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to the Jerusalem Interfaith Center. Thank you for the American Muslim and Multifaith Women's Empowerment Council. We appreciate it very much. And follow all of us, all of the sponsor organizations on social media so you can find out when we do our next webinar. But thank you all, and we'll all be in touch.